Hi and welcome back to a new video. Today we will be reviewing the HYTE Y60. There have been multiple videos out there so far, and what I find quite interesting is that several reviewers marked this as like 011 killer, which I find personally very interesting. I don't even see it like as an offense, because I think it always needs competition to have some kind of evolutions in the business. It's the same for AMD and Intel. That's why if they have some cool stuff in this case, I would definitely appreciate that. But I want to find out, what could this case maybe do better than the 011 Dynamic Evo? But before we get to that, a word to our sponsor from today, which is again Hetzner. Because right now they are running a special offer where you don't have any kind of setup fee for your dedicated root servers. This offer is valid starting from the AX41, which is using a Ryzen 5 3600 and 64GB of memory, up to the AX101, which is using the 16-core AMD Ryzen 5950X with 128GB ECC memory and also dual 3.84TB NVMe drives. And depending on your configuration or the server choice, you will save between $40 and up to $108 because you're saving the setup fee. Of course, you will still have all the good features Hetzner is always offering, such as gigabit connection and also no minimum contract period. If you want to find out more, check out the link in the description below. The HYTE Y60 is, just judging from the appearance, already something quite unique and special, and I totally appreciate if companies think outside the box and just don't copy anything else, but design their own stuff. And that's definitely what they did, or what they tried. Kudos for that. But there's something I want to point out right from the start, because I just started unpacking the case, like do the first evaluation, and then I figured out, or I spotted that something must have gone wrong with the packaging, because this like foam piece seemed to be for securing the riser card, because in this case you can only mount the GPU vertically, like not horizontally like you normally would do. But for the vertical mount you have this like riser card included, which is not only a riser cable, but it's to make it a bit more visually appearing. And then if we look down here, you can see this is like heavily bent, which is not a huge deal, to be fully honest, because it's just like a little bit of steel and it's like a thin steel. I can easily bend this back like with a plier or whatever, but maybe they should improve how this was mounted. I'm not even sure how this was mounted exactly, but yeah, something apparently went wrong with the shipping. There are 3 fans included in total, 3 x 120mm fans. 2 are sitting in the bottom and 1 is sitting as exhaust in the rear. And because I personally would consider this a high-end case, already just judging from the price, if it's $200, then you would typically build a system which is like 1,500 euro or more. And then you would typically also buy your own fans. Could be normal fans, but most of the time nowadays they are RGB fans. And then it's usually also a waste if the manufacturer of the case already includes fans. I get why they're doing that, because then they can argue, I know it's a $200 case, but hey, 3 fans are included. But at the same time, those type of fans, they are just a few dollars, and it would be much better if they just do not include these 3 fans and then just sell it for like $10 less. That would be the better option. One thing I also absolutely have to criticize is the side panel. Well, first of all, you can see that I took the red version, which is just personal preference. I just liked the fact that they made a red case. It's a bit more uncommon these days, and I like when things are out of the box and unique. So I like the design, but what I don't like is the fact that you have this huge plastic thing which is built in, and that's also already including the dust filter. You cannot remove the entire like injection molded plastic part. It's like glued to the like steel part of the side panel. So you cannot remove it, and this includes the dust filter. And if you've been following me for a longer time period, then you know that I'm not a friend of dust filters. For multiple reasons, because it's the same for me as buying an expensive car. If you're building a unique and expensive PC system, you should also take the time every 3 or 4 months to maybe clean your PC. It's not a lot of effort, it only takes a few minutes to like use, I don't know, dust blower or like, I don't know, vacuum cleaner, whatever, to clean your PC. It's not a lot of effort, but long term you will have better temperatures, you will have lower noise because you can run your fans at a lower RPM. And yeah, the whole airflow will be a lot better without dust filter. And I don't have the option here. I cannot remove this thing. That's something I don't like. In general though, we have a two-chamber design. It obviously will remind you of the O11 Dynamic, but in my eyes it's also not a copy because they had their own touch to it. They have a lot of like tiny but also interesting details, like having the HYTE logo in here, having the H inside the like HDD case. That is cool. So they paid attention to tiny details. That's something I really like. For example, also those, like, I don't know how they're called, like those rubber things where you can route your cable through from the front side. Those are a bit different than the standard ones. And I'm curious how this will look. I could imagine that this might look better from the front than the standard just put through thing. I'm not sure how to describe it, but in general also the manufacturing quality is pretty decent. You don't have any sharp edges like you would have it on like 50 or 60 euro case. Everything is pretty smooth. I don't expect that you will cut yourself somewhere building in there. What does not match the manufacturing quality though is the top part. Mainly because it's made of plastic. I'm going to be fully honest, because you feel it's like very wobbly, and again we have the dust filter included. Not gonna talk about that anymore, but in general, because this obviously feels like plastic and also looks like plastic, because you can see a clear difference between the painted steel and the plastic on the case. Like it's a clear difference. I know it's very difficult to make your plastic look like it's metal. That is very complicated also to get the same kind of tone, but since the difference here between the plastic and the steel is so huge, you can clearly see the difference. And I think that's not great. If this part was steel, even if it's just like painted steel, it would look so much nicer. In the top area of the case, we have this radiator bracket, which a lot of other reviewers talk positively about, which I cannot agree with. It doesn't really make much sense to me. This U shape always leads to the fact that you would have this like sandwich type, because you always have to have either the radiator on top or the fans on top. But you cannot go for this, I would call this the normal solution, where you assemble your fans and radiator outside and then connect it with your bracket and then put everything in as one unit. But this way you're always limited. For example, with a 360 radiator, which is in theory compatible, you would always have to have your fittings in front. You cannot have them in the back because it would always straight collide with this. It would be better, or just like also normal, to have a flat thing on top, because then you can always decide, do you want to have your fans on the bottom, do you want to have your radiator on bottom, and then just take your thing, mount it on the bracket, ready to go. If we flip the case, on the bottom we have another dust filter. Even though you cannot remove the dust filter in this case, it's kind of okay to me because you could just leave away the entire thing. If you remove the entire part, then I mean this would just be kind of visible, but since this is the bottom, you will never see it and you could just leave it open. One more thing, those fans are not even PWM fans. Another reason why those fans should not be in this case. On the other side though, there's a very good feature for routing the cables of the graphics card, because if it will be mounted vertical in this position, your power cables will most likely end up somewhere here, and then you can easily route them through the bottom. But at the same time, you will also have to remove the fans to access this from the bottom. As you can see, I'm now done with building the system. I'm quite happy with the results. There are some things we still have to talk about regarding the case. First of all, I mean, one of the major aspects about this case visually is the fact that it looks like an aquarium a little bit, because you don't have the typical 90-degree bend in front and like a strut in between, but you have two 45-degree angles. And yeah, so in between those two glass plates, I have to admit the gap is a little bit too big for my taste. I think you will remember the part where I was talking about these rubber elements in between here, and I think these split up elements would have been better, because right now you can see, because the 24-pin cable is so thick, you can see right through and potentially see also messy cables behind. Also talking about messy cables, the USB 3.0 connector on the bottom is also not ideal, but I think that's just purely related to the connector itself, because I also thought about using a 90-degree angled connector for the bottom, because I also thought about using one of these 90-degree angled connectors like adapter PCBs. But the thing is, when I plugged in the 90-degree angled connector, the cable would just go right against the case itself. So that didn't work out. But if you look in from the front, you will always clearly see that. So that's not that nice. Same goes for the USB Type-C connector. I'm not even sure, are there 90-degree angled connectors? Or like 90-degree angled adapters, I mean? Maybe I have to look that up. And for the EPS connector on top, I also want to add I had to squeeze them in hard. Like really push with the radiator bracket from the top. When I screwed it down, I had to squeeze the cables in there, in between. Like there's not much clearance for the cables. Same goes for these cables. I think it's still alright for these, but the ones on the left, they lack like 3 or 4 millimeters. It's time to draw a conclusion about the HYTE Y60. And I have to admit, I have a bit mixed feelings about the case. First of all, it is a very nice design. Like I like the fact that they went a different route. They had their own ideas. Thinking outside the box is something I really appreciate. They have this 45-degree angled thing, which is the general design language. You have the 45-degree angle in the front with the glass window, and you have it everywhere in like the fan grills and the intake and exhaust and everywhere. You have those 45-degree angles, and that's something which is pretty cool and not that common. So they went a different route. They tried different things with like the riser cable, which has a special like plastic enclosure, makes it look higher quality. At the same time, this general thing or this general idea with the vertical GPU and the riser cable is also limiting the case heavily. First of all, talking about the vertical GPU mount, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward to use. I decided to go with this MSI card because it's quite thick, quite beefy, quite long. And then you have clearance of about 25 millimeters to the glass front panel, which is still enough for this card. But thinking about the 3090 Ti and maybe if the 40 series is following this route, I think we might see a lot thicker cards. This card has like 2.7 or 2.8 slot design, I think. And then I guess in future we will see more cards with like 3 slot or even above. So it could be quite tricky when it comes to the space and clearance in the front with the glass panel. That's something you have to keep in mind. And at the same time, when I was giving my feedback about the case, I was criticizing the price, because just generally speaking, if I look at the case and like the parts which the case is made of and the way it's painted, it does not reflect €200 or $200 to me. And then you would get the argument, yeah, but there is a €50 riser cable included. Yeah, but I mean, that's not optional. It's mandatory for this case. You cannot use the case without the riser cable, so that argument doesn't really count. You can only use the GPU vertically, which is fine if you're looking for that. But yeah, with €200, it's a bit on the edge, I think. And generally speaking, this case has some design flaws which would have been so easy to fix if there was communication with the enthusiast community before manufacturing. That's something Lian Li is very good at. So they make a prototype like the Evo, and then 1 year later, they have the final Evo after going through all the community feedback. And that's something I think case manufacturers should look into, because I think the results would have been better. Like the plastic top, the non-removable dust filters, and then there's no cable management option. Like Corsair has this rapid route system, Lian Li has a bracket, Fantex has also their cable management systems. Others are doing this part better. It's lacking on this case. And they're like tiny parts which should have been improved. Like very tiny things that could have been improved prior to mass production, but now I guess it's too late. Like when plastic molds are done for injection molding, there's nothing you can fix anymore. That's a bit sad because the concept is great. And yeah, with a little bit of improvement, they could have done quite a lot better, I think. Generally speaking, it's a case you can get if you're willing to pay the price. The price and performance are not directly in relation to me, but if you like the design, I think you can get it. All right, thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye-bye.